Real estate or Bitcoin, which kind of debt will make you richer quicker? By the end of this video, you're going to really understand the differences, and I ask you to put in the comments, what do you think? First, why do people borrow to build wealth? It all starts with real estate, right? Most people understand, I can't afford that building, so I'm going to have to borrow 80% of the value of it from a bank to own it. And then as the price grows in value, I will grow my wealth. And that idea at the core has made many, many, many millionaires. But when you look at today and the possibility of borrowing to buy the real estate of the future, like Bitcoin, why don't people think about that the same way? If today you can borrow to buy Bitcoin when it's worth 100 grand, why not do that if you think it's going to be worth $1 million one day? Let's see. The old way was real estate, right? Like I just spoke about. You buy a property, you borrow most of that money. Most people borrow most of that money. You get rental income, it pays down the loan, and then you build your net worth, and then you borrow to buy more real estate. And you keep doing that, keep doing that, keep doing that until you're a millionaire, multimillionaire, possibly billionaire. The difference with real estate is, you gotta leverage a big physical piece of property, right? So it's located somewhere. It's a slow process, right? It's a monthly payment you have to pay back to a bank. The property value appreciates normally 3 to 5% a year, depending on what kind of real estate, right? Like if you get into a good area, it might be better. And I was lucky enough to get into an up and coming area, so my yearly gain was much bigger than that. Then you have rental income. And there's different types of rental income. There's business rental income, there's vacation rental income, and then there's residential income. And then there's tax benefits to owning real estate. Now, the future, I believe, is in borrowing to buy Bitcoin or Ethereum or coins like this that have a big national and international appeal to investors. And the difference between borrowing to buy Bitcoin versus borrowing to buy a property is very, very different. And because of the way smart contracts work, there's no monthly payments when you borrow to buy Bitcoin and Ethereum, depending on how you do it. If you go to centralized exchanges, yes, there's probably monthly payments. If you go to centralized entities, there's probably monthly payments. When you go through decentralized exchanges, meaning DeFi, there's no monthly payments. As long as your collateral is more than your loan, you're good. And what has Bitcoin done over the past 5-10 years? Way more than 10% per year. 15 to 30% is pretty small in your thinking if you believe Bitcoin and Ethereum will continue on its current pace, because the current pace is much higher than even that. So, and then the really cool part is it's self-custody, so you could take it anywhere around the world. You don't have to be limited to where your location of your property is. You could take your property anywhere. So that's one of the reasons why I believe Bitcoin and Ethereum, borrowing to get more of it, is going to change the world. And if you want to learn more right now, before you finish watching the video, in the link, there's a description. In the description, there's a link to learn more about how to borrow to buy 3 times more Bitcoin with the same amount of money. You can check that out at Stackit.ai/guide or click the link in the description. All right, let's start out with the risk. What are the risk frameworks? 3 levels of risk. The asset risk. So with Bitcoin, there's volatility risk. With real estate, there's volatility risk, but it's way more hidden, because most people are not looking day to day of the value of their property, right? If you bought a property at $500K, $1 million, and now the comps in the location are starting to go down, you're not constantly seeing the change of the value like you are in Bitcoin, right? Your property could go down in value a lot, but you only know that once you go to sell it. And that's the difference between the volatility of Bitcoin and Ethereum, because there's a lot of people that just bought real estate at the height in Florida and their property values are dropping. But they don't know that day to day. They only find out when they go to sell and they realize, wow, I'm going to have to sell this for less than I bought it for a few years ago. And that's how that volatility is different. Now, debt risk is different. The debt on a property, you can foreclose, and that means you lose your down payment, you lose all the monthly payments you've been making to pay off that debt, and you end up kind of homeless, having to figure out where you're going to live because you can't afford to pay your mortgage anymore. And that people can lose their life savings like that. And then there's an even worse thing, which I've learned about pretty recent, which is called equity trap, right? Where you can pay off your home and retire. And then it's like, okay, now I want to borrow off of my property because I have all that equity in the property, and the bank won't let you because you don't have a job anymore. You don't have a way of repaying that loan every month. So they're not going to give you a loan against that. Versus with crypto, there's a liquidation risk, which comes from you having a collateral value and a loan value. And if the collateral value falls, let's say you have $100,000 worth of Bitcoin with a 75K loan, if the price of Bitcoin reaches, let's say 77,000, the system that you're using will take part of your collateral to repay your loan. And that's what's called a liquidation. And that has a chance of taking down the value of your collateral. But in the same token, you're really just repaying a loan that you took. So if you think about it, you're not going homeless because you invested in Bitcoin and you borrowed money to buy Bitcoin. You're really just repaying the loan you took. And that to me is better than being homeless. And then control risk. Really, the bank owns your property. As soon as you buy a house, you're putting a down payment. And you only really own that house once you pay the entire mortgage. And do you really even own it then? Because if you stop paying property tax, the government will take it from you too. And I've seen things like my parents have bought a house 30 plus years ago, and their mortgage payment was very low 30 years ago, as you can imagine. But now their property tax monthly cost is about the price of their mortgage. So you get to a point where you finish paying the mortgage, but you still have to pay the property tax. And in most cases, that property tax is going to keep growing because the value of the property is going to keep inflating over time. So your property tax is going to become higher than your mortgage. And if you don't have the income to pay that, or the Social Security or retirement funding to pay that, you're going to have to sell it because you're not going to be able to borrow off of it to live. So this is where that's a risk that most people do not even understand. With crypto, you have that ownership of the property you bought, Bitcoin or Ethereum. You could have that in a self-custody wallet. You could have that in a MetaMask Coinbase wallet where you own the keys, not your crypto. If you have it sitting on a exchange like Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini, stuff like that, FTX, things like this happen, companies go out of business, and that crypto goes in their proceedings to pay back their investors. And you lose your money, and maybe you get paid back after the investors get paid back. So that's a risk that most people don't really understand. And then, of course, the stress of property ownership, I'll tell you my story in a few, is pretty different than owning crypto. Yes, the price of crypto, you visually see the ups and downs, so that stress could affect you. But if you understand everything, you'll know it's a better deal to just own the crypto, I'm telling you. So I'll tell you my story. Okay, so I bought an Airbnb 2001, I feel like, whatever COVID. It was right before COVID. And I borrowed off real estate to buy it. So the property value was, when I bought it, was $65K. I borrowed from my house to pay for the property. Now, $65K, put that into the property. At that time, Bitcoin was like about 5K. Ethereum was about 200, I feel like, something like that. So I had a choice at that moment. I was looking at Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the property. And I was like, I was asking different people who are investors and know about this stuff. And they were like, dude, don't play around with this Bitcoin thing. This is a fad. You're not really sure what's going to happen there. Real estate is real. You'll own that property. You'll get Airbnb income. So I was like, all right, you know what? Let me do the real estate. And fast forward, I just sold the real estate last year for 130K. So that's good. In about 4 years, I doubled the value. Amazing, right? Bitcoin is over 100 grand now. That's 20 times more. Ethereum is 25,000 right now, 10 times more, 12 times more, something like that. If I would have bought the Bitcoin and Ethereum with that 65,000, I would have had way more than I had with the real estate. Yes, I was getting monthly income through the Airbnb, but it wasn't that much when you deduct how much it was costing to run it, right? Like I had to pay cleaners, I had to pay people to manage it because it was in the Dominican Republic. I had to have people watch it, right? Every time something went wrong, I had to pay extra fees. Things happen where you had to refund people. There was hurricanes where the pool area got messed up, so we all had to chip in like $1,000 to fix the pool. All kind of things. I had to replace the furniture multiple times because the water level got high enough where my was on the first floor and I had to replace my furniture. So when you think about, when you add all that up, I would have way more money, way less stress, and selling it took me 5-6 months. And I luckily sold it before everybody else realized you should sell before whatever's about to happen happens. And I was lucky. I doubled the value. I doubled the income of the investment, yes. But if I would have bought Bitcoin and Ethereum, I would have had way more, and I still could have borrowed off of it. I couldn't really borrow off of the property in Dominican Republic unless I wanted to take high interest rates from the local country, right? Because you can't borrow off of a property in another country, at least to my understanding. So I borrowed initially from the United States property to buy the Dominican Republic property. But then if I wanted to borrow off that property, I would have to borrow in their banks, and their banks had way higher interest, so I didn't think it made sense. If I would have been in Bitcoin and Ethereum, it doesn't matter where in the world I was, I could have borrowed off of it whenever I wanted to. And that is super powerful. And if we go back to what I was telling you about having an equity trap where you're retired and you've been paying this mortgage forever, but now you got to pay property tax that costs the same amount as the mortgage used to, plus the bank won't even let you borrow off the property because you have no income and you can't pay a monthly fee. So when you think about all these pieces, man, I can't see how crypto is not a better investment than real estate. But please let me know in the comments if you think differently. And of course, like and subscribe. But another big thing that I remember in dealing with this is when you have a property, it's awesome. It feels cool to be able to say, yeah, I own a property in the Dominican Republic. But the truth is, the people managing it really own it. Because if they mess up, your value of your property is done. Your value of your income is done, right? So you really need a good team unless you are very close to the property and you can manage the whole thing yourself, which I know people that do that and make a good living, or they have a bunch of properties and they have a manager that they really trust manage all of it. That's a way to do well. And I've seen a lot of people do well. But for most people, crypto is going to be easier. Another big thing is the cost to get into it. To buy a property, I said I needed $65,000 to buy that property. If I wanted to put a down payment in that location, I could have done that, but I would have had a high interest rate on the property. I borrowed from a United States bank, so I had a lower interest. I caught the interest right before COVID, so it was an amazing interest rate. So that's different, but I still needed tens of thousands, right? Now, I couldn't do it with $100. With crypto, you can deposit $100 and borrow $250. You could deposit $1,000, borrow $2,500. In a bank, it's never happening with real estate. You can't say, hey, I got $100. Can you help me buy some real estate? It's never happening. And that's where crypto and real estate, you start to see that the physicality of real estate, it treats it really like a cement block. And it literally is that, right? There's cement sitting in a location that can't move. And you're really subjected to whatever is happening in that area to make sure that your real estate is doing well and growing in value. And yes, I was lucky enough to, have partners and people that I knew that were telling me, yeah, this area is going to be good. But I could have been wrong, right? And the property value couldn't have doubled in 4 years. And I would have just been making a couple bucks every month. And I was lucky enough to benefit. But again, most people are not. Most people bought at the height. And now they have to sell at a lower cost, or they're not able to repay their loan. So it's tough. But with crypto, it's like liquid. You can take it anywhere. You can move around the world with it. Well, you can't get on planes with liquid, but there's water everywhere, if you want to take that analogy, right? There's instant access to money. Like literally right now, it's 9 o'clock at night and I'm shooting this video and I could take a loan against my money and spend it. You can't do that with real estate. If I wanted to take a loan against my real estate, I got to go through a whole process. And this is the process, right? You need to apply for a loan. There's all kind of paperwork. You got to provide income docs and say, hey, I'm working. I can pay back this loan. Here's my credit score. Here's everything about my life to know that I can afford to pay this loan back. Then you have to get an appraisal of the property so they can say, because you can say, hey, I need a loan for $1 million for a property that's $200,000. So the bank has to get involved and say, hey, wait a minute. I need to make sure that this property is worth what you say it is. Then you have to close on the property, and that's fees, right? And then there's taxes and all this different stuff. With crypto, it's as easy as literally 5 minutes. I'll put a link in the video of how easy it is. In the description of how easy it is. You literally put your email, open up a wallet, send dollars, borrow instantly. Have the money instantly. Nobody writing paperwork, nobody checking your bank accounts, your credit score, none of that. It's literally, do you have the cash as collateral? Here's the loan. There you go, done. And that's amazing. And imagine that on steroids once you have years and years and years, just like a real estate property, like you're paying real estate for years, 30-year mortgages, right? If you did the same thing with the Bitcoin or Ethereum property and you say every month I'm just going to put in $100, borrow $250 for 30 years, you're going to end up with a lot of money. And then you can borrow off that money whenever you want. Which is better, to retire with a real estate property that the bank doesn't let you borrow against, or retire with some Bitcoin and Ethereum where no one can tell you what you can do with your own money anywhere in the world? To me, I think it's Bitcoin. Of course, once you get to a certain level of wealth, though, you want to do both. And of course, I say real estate is a way to preserve wealth. I think crypto is a way to create it. And I honestly believe that past generations were able to build wealth with real estate. I don't think these generations, the current and going forward, I don't know if that's going to be the case. I actually doubt it. So, okay, final verdict. Which loan wins? As you heard, I really believe Bitcoin is way better than real estate. I actually sold my real estate and put it into Bitcoin because I really am, eating my own dog food. I really think the truth of investing is people just do what worked in the past. They're very scared to take future risk. But crypto is the real estate of the future, and it's becoming less and less risky. If you look at it, Bitcoin is being bought by countries, states, corporations, family funds, retirement funds. This is much less risky than it used to be. Now, real estate, we have had a big growth in real estate, and many people believe it's going to have to come down for everybody to be able to buy houses. If real estate keeps growing in value, then most people are not going to be able to buy a house. So if that happens, society is going to be damaged by that. And I don't think that's going to be the case, because if you watch, they're starting to do things like tiny homes. Only about 30% of the United States, or 70%, is one of the two, is used. There's a lot of space in the United States where we can make homes. I did a search the other day, and it said in the United States alone, we can probably build 700,000 more homes. But they don't, because they don't want the property values to go down. Eventually, I don't know if that's going to be able to be stopped. I think they're going to have to do that. And Bitcoin, there can never be more Bitcoin printed. So which one is a better investment? And of course, Ethereum, you look at BlackRock and all these companies are buying billions and billions of dollars of Ethereum because everything is running on Ethereum. All these smart contracts that allow you to take out loans on Bitcoin, they run on the Ethereum blockchain. So owning those two things are like owning the future real estate. And I think Bitcoin and Ethereum are much better things to hold than real estate, as long as you manage your risk, right? And what my app Stack does is it allows you to protect that downside of liquidation. If the prices fall, we'll sell some of your assets to protect that liquidation. I've been running Stack for 2 years plus, helping hundreds of people do this every day, multiple times a month. People doing this every month for 2 years. If you want to learn more about the things I've learned during those 2 years, watch this next video.